Alright, welcome to the Crystal Clear Watchmaking YouTube channel. Today we're opening a watch to start, and you can see a little bit of their design right with the opening there. The packaging got a little damaged in shipping, and it's not that high quality packaging. There's no crazy materials here, but you know what? I don't really care because we don't buy watches so we can have cool boxes. I don't really think that's what it's all about. So here is the watch, and I think the presentation starting off is pretty good. This strap here I'm going to actually revisit because it's a surprisingly good part of the package. But really, we're all about the head of the watch right here and all those funky patterns it's making. So let's get into the watch review. So let's talk about this watch a little bit closer in then. We can start off with some specifications. It's made out of 316L surgical steel, which if you watch our podcast, which I'm having a great time producing with Jay, is basically what we're looking for. This is a high-grade steel used in the case. It's got a sapphire crystal. It's got anti-reflective coating. That's what it says. Honestly, I don't get too much of the crazy blue hue that you see on the anti-reflective coating, so I assume this is just a minor coating to kind of take away some of the strongest bits of the glare. The water resistance is 5 atmospheres, so not crazy. Don't go diving in this thing. It's got a diameter of 39 millimeters, which in my opinion is perfect. It's got a thickness of 11.4 millimeters, so maybe ever so slightly thick, but in my opinion still definitely within the range of reasonable. And inside the back, it's got a Seiko NH35A movement. Now that movement has hacking, hand winding, about 40 hours of power reserve, and you can see right in the back there a rotor for automatic winding, and they personalize it a little bit with a little bit of their geometrical look that they got going on. Alright, so let's talk about this watch in a little bit of an experiential way, because we can't talk about the heritage and how this watch went to the moon, whatever, stuff like that, right? We can only talk about what we see. And what we see is an amazingly mesmerizing dial. That's pretty much the main selling point of this watch, and I really love it because it gives me something different to look at. I mean, I've seen a lot of watches, and this is a really unique idea, so I'm a big fan of it. If you're a person who likes people to be interested in your watch, you want to have a watch conversation, this is one of those things. First day that I wore it, somebody was like, hey, what's going on there? They wanted a bit of a closer look. So something definitely noticeable, if that's important to you. I personally like just being able to look down at my wrist and have, kind of an enjoyable little show going on for me. Now, one of the cool features of this watch is that since it's got 3 discs rotating here, one as the hour hand, one as the minute hand, and one as the seconds hand, as time passes, you actually get slight variations in the pattern. So you can look at it in the morning, you can look at it 30 minutes later, and it gives you a little bit something different and interesting to look at. It also even is kind of interesting to look at from an angle where it causes sort of like an angular explosion. I don't know, it just looks a bit different. So what I'm trying to say is I like this watch. Now, how do you read the time? It's pretty easy. The blacked out marker is the hours. This one's the minutes. So this is 9:12, right? Now, the indices on this are not kind of the star of the show, so they're just recessed into the white dial. But I find that it's reasonably readable. Legibility is not the main factor of this watch, but I actually don't find myself struggling to read the time very often. I mean, it's surprisingly legible is what I would say. Okay. So let's take a moment to actually flip this over and talk about the strap, which was actually a surprising feature to me because generally what you see on straps like this is you see that you get a genuine leather or a top grain leather strap, with top grain being a little more fancy. I was surprised to see that this was listed as a full grain leather strap, which is actually the highest grade of leather. That means they did absolutely no changes to the surface here other than the tanning. Whereas if it's top grain, then they will rub that away with like sandpaper or whatever, and then they'll apply a surface to it so that it's always the same and always smooth and always whatever. And most straps that you get are top grain from micro brands and such, or genuine leather. This one is full grain leather, which is stronger, more durable, because that top layer hasn't been removed. So I was kind of surprised to see that. It's a selling point that I think a lot of people don't even notice. So I'm surprised that they put the effort into getting such a high quality thing there. But I guess it speaks well for them. Of course, I'm not a leather expert, honestly, so if they tell me it's full grain, I just trust them. I don't know how I would know the difference between a full grain and a top grain when I was observing it. But it is pretty nice. I am sure that it's actually leather though. So it wore down pretty easly. It was a little tight on the sides at the beginning right here, you know, pinching you. But now that I've worn it for a while, couple days, and it becomes super comfortable, no complaints. So let's talk complaints about this watch. Honestly, I don't really have that many complaints. There's not too much you can complain about at this price point. I think it's hitting a lot of the things that we want to hit. It's got good steel, it's got sapphire, it's got a respectable movement, it's got a good concept, it wears well, comes with a nice strap. I mean, if you like the concept, I honestly don't think that there's much to complain about. But if I am going to complain about something, one thing is that this is a movement that has hand winding. So this crown is just a little recessed into the case, a little bit small, and it's a little bit annoying to hand wind. It's like you're using the tips of your fingers. It's kind of like a Seiko crown. Seiko undersizes a lot of their crowns, and that kind of is what it reminds me of, frankly. I guess it makes sense because it's attached to a Seiko movement, so there you go. There's an excuse built in. So that's a tiny little complaint, but I don't think it's that big of a deal because, once again, it is automatic. So once it starts moving, you don't need to keep hand winding it. You can just slap it on your wrist and not really worry about it from that point onwards. So that's one reason why it's not so much of a big deal. If this was a hand wind only movement, then I'd have a bigger problem with that. The other complaint about this watch that I have, only because the dial is so mesmerizing, did I notice. But if you look real deep, we're going to get in close here, and you'll notice that the edges of these wheels, every once in a while, have little silver cutouts through the black. And so what I figured out is those little silver marks are every 90 degrees. So I imagine that these wheels were in a sheet, and then they were cut out from the sheet and from each other. And that's why you get a little mark every 90 degrees. I might even take this apart and put a little Sharpie on the edges of those or something to try to black them out slightly. I don't know. It's a very minor thing that you don't notice 99% of the time. But, you know, if I'm trying to come up with complaints, which here I actually have to struggle because the concept here is nailed, you know, and there's not too much to really complain about. But if I am going to come up with a complaint, that would be it. Another ridiculously small complaint, as long as I'm complaining, is that the case back here has a non-standard sort of method of holding it on there. I really don't like getting out these sort of like eyeglasses screws in order to get the case back off. I'm kind of not a fan of that. It would be easier for me to regulate it and such if it weren't that way. Now let's pop this guy on the time grapher and get some data. So here we are at the time grapher, and what I have to say about this result is I think it's reasonable. The rate is certainly within the specifications of an NH35 out of the factory. They're unadjusted. They're not a fancy Rolex movement. The beat error is a little higher than I'd like. Not the worst thing in the world, but also not great. The rate's pretty reasonable, but I'm going to actually I'm going to actually fix the beat error and the rate. I'm going to bring the beat error down to 0 or 0.1, something like that. And I like my rate to be just a little bit faster. You know, like 2 seconds a day, I would much prefer over minus 2 seconds a day. The amplitude's healthy, so what this really needs is adjustment. It doesn't have an intrinsic problem that I'm too worried about. I'd say it's okay. I mean, the speed error is a little bit higher than I'd like, frankly. Frankly, it being shipped, I like it to be a little bit lower. But, you know, it's a $300 watch. It's not a $3,000 watch. If you want one that has, you know, perfect stats across the board, you should be really buying a Rolex. Okay, let's do a final wrap-up on this watch. My final thoughts are, this is not a pilot's watch. This is not a dive watch. This is a watch that's purely about concept and art. It has the kind of things that you would like out of a watch that you can appreciate, like a reasonable size, sapphire crystal, the 316L steel, a little bit of anti-reflective coating. You know, it can take a tiny splash without a problem. But all the rest of the specs, all those things that you consider normally, how strong is the loom, whatever, that's not part of why you buy this watch. This watch is about the experience. This watch is about looking down at your wrist and smiling that you're looking at something so unique. And I have found myself smiling at this thing many, many times in the week since I bought it. And I feel like if you smiled when you first saw this on screen, then you will smile for as long as you own it, because it's really quite an interesting piece. Alright, well that's all for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we'll see you next video.